The fifth victim of the World Trade Center tragedy was laid to rest today. Funeral services for Robert Kirkpatrick were held this morning in Suffern, New York. Funerals for the other 4 victims were held yesterday. One more person is still believed buried in the rubble. Well, those who survived the tragedy are looking for compensation. A lot of lawsuits are expected, but will the plaintiffs collect? The I-Team's Al White looks at who could be held liable.
Put this around.
There was no communication.
With more than 1,000 injured, 5 dead, and one still missing 5 days later, the World Trade Center tragedy is a ready-made scene for litigation. Lawsuits. Remember the helpless expression of horror on this man's face? His name is Keith Mills from Queens. This is how he looks today, just before his release from New York Downtown Hospital.
This guy said to me, that was with us, he says, Keith, I think this is it. And I said to him, I said, yeah, I think so too. And at that point, I said, well, I have to say a prayer for all of us.
Keith says he is a Port Authority employee with only 2 months on the job. He was eating his lunch and in a split second was fighting for his life. Keith says he was located on the B2 level in close proximity to where the bomb went off.
When you're that frightened, you will jump over ocean. No, I'm telling you. Yes, if you're that frightened. Well, I was so frightened that if I was injured as long as I could get up.
Keith says, fortunately, his fellow worker was able to radio their location, but both suffered prolonged smoke inhalation before help arrived.
Some fumes was coming from somewhere that prevented us from breathing also.
Keith was treated by Dr. John Ferry, Jr. at Downtown Hospital.
The majority of the patients that we've treated here were patients that had smoke inhalation as their primary injury. Like Mr. Mills, many of them also had relatively minor injuries to their muscles and their bones, but the primary injury was to the lungs and the windpipe.
Dr. Ferry says there could be long-term effects for smoke inhalation victims.
Anybody who has had a significant lung disease or pulmonary respiratory disease in the past is going to be in that category of people at risk for long-term problems.
Keith isn't saying whether or not he'll sue for his sufferings. He could be one of the hundreds of bomb victims who might sue the World Trade Center landlord, the Port Authority. Its executive director, Stanley Bresnow, says they have insurance.
Port Authority has $600 million in property insurance, $400 million in liability insurance.
Attorney Pam Leopakis of the largest plaintiff law firm in the city has taken the initial step toward a lawsuit. She is the first.
We filed a notice of claim on behalf of one of the individuals who was very seriously injured.
One area that might make the Port Authority vulnerable to lawsuits is the 1985 anti-terrorism report that allegedly warned the Port Authority its public parking area is vulnerable to terrorist action.
A judgment was made that a complex like the World Trade Center with hundreds of businesses and thousands of visitors, hotel, restaurants, shops, should not be without public parking, especially in light of the fact that so many other large public and private buildings have public parking.
Can I talk about the fact that they wouldn't spend $50,000 for a security system?
Mark Manis, partner of Harry Lipsick law firm that specializes in personal injuries, says dozens of victims have contacted his firm, but
at this point, our feeling is let the police do their work. Let the FBI do their job, then we'll do our job. At this point, we're in no rush, that's all. Well, just because someone is injured doesn't necessarily mean there's liability. Maybe there is, but there must be negligence. There must be a lack of reasonable care.
Al White for the Channel 9 I-Team.
There's a lot of speculation today over who may be responsible for the Twin Towers bombing. Investigators aren't yet focusing on any one group. The I-Team's Matthew Schwartz has that part of the story.
As the investigation continues, anti-terrorism experts tell the I-Team the Because there are so many potential suspects in the World Trade Center bombing, it's easier to say who is not responsible.
Good Tuesday morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, G. Gordon Liddy.
Watergate conspirator and terrorism expert turned radio personality G. Gordon Liddy says he'd be surprised if Libyans, like those who blew up Pan Am Flight 103, are connected to the Trade Center explosion.
The explosive of choice is a Semtex, which is a plastique. And this is, from everything we can tell, not that. They have a huge amount of Semtex, and that's what they would use.
I mean, there are groups that we would say obviously did not do anything, such as the IRA, that depends upon their goodwill in the New York City area as well as other places.
One expert on terrorism says that if you put together every foreign group that believes it has a grievance against the U.S., along with everyone else who could have been responsible for the bomb here, you'd have enough people to fill up Giant Stadium.
The big problem is that there are a lot more bombings in the last 10 years that are done not just for terrorism. You have some of these terrorist groups have to drop a bomb once in a while just to get paid.
So who might be responsible? Sources say authorities have investigated the Serbian connection. The Serbs could be angry over U.S. policies in the former Yugoslavia.
I would add to that the PLO and Hamas. These are the Palestinians, and they are, of course, unhappy with the United States' traditional alliance and support of Israel.
Iran, Iraq, the Serbs, they all have it in for us.
If the U.S. determines who is responsible, Liddy has his ideas about what should happen next.
Track them down no matter where they were in the world and put a bullet in their brain. That's how you take care of a terrorist. A good terrorist is a dead terrorist.
Experts say we shouldn't get too optimistic about the bombers being caught. At LaGuardia Airport in 1975, a bomb killed 11 people. The case